Okay, I think we're live according to
Cool.
this. I've got YouTube loaded also, and I don't see it yet. Oh, there it goes. Cool.
Okay.
Now we're
You might want to
actually
close
live.
it just for bandwidth. Hello, world. Right. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll probably have more people rolling in. I was just talking to Greg about why I decided to do this call. There's been a lot of discussion on Twitter since I published my blog post. Of course, this conversation has been going on much longer than that. But the blog post I published on Friday generated some discussion around the BIP148 user-activated soft fork. And Greg is a longtime colleague of mine, and he has some concerns about it. So I wanted to give him an opportunity to discuss his more than 140 characters, given the and nuance of this of the. With that said, we'll just do some quick introductions, and then I'll let Greg go ahead and share his thoughts about BIP148. So my name is John Light. I'm a longtime Bitcoin enthusiast. I am an advisor to Bitcoin startups and investors, and I currently work full-time at a Bitcoin startup called Abra. Now, Abra's CEO, Bill Barheit, recently signed the New York Agreement, also known as SegWit 2x, and has also spoken out in support of BIP148 in the past. My personal opinion is that BIP148 and user-activated soft forks in general are not incompatible with the New York Agreement, and it is my desire, I would like to see that all of the overlapping support for SegWit back BIP148 or another user-activated soft fork that activates before August 1st so that we can activate SegWit without any issues. I think given the agreement in the New York Agreement and similar agreements in the past that most people want SegWit to be activated. And so it's just, the question is just how. And Greg has some concerns about BIP148 in particular that we're going to discuss today. With that out of the way, Greg, could you go ahead and give just a quick introduction about yourself, and then feel free to just jump right into the discussion.
Sure, thanks, John. So my name is Greg Slepak. I work on security software, and I work for the OK Turtles Foundation, where we support beneficial decentralization technologies. I've been in the cryptocurrency community space for quite some time now. Have written various posts on various different topics, from Zcash to Bitcoin to Ethereum, etc. And I kind of keep an eye on the whole space as a researcher and also doing my own work in the area. And the BIP148 situation caught my eye recently, and I noticed that it started gaining a lot of momentum. So I decided to have a closer look at it and check it out and see what the whole fuss was about. And when I looked a little bit closer at it, I realized that the whole situation seems a little bit, well, basically I want to make it clear first that I'm totally in favor of SegWit being adopted on Bitcoin, on the blockchain. The concerns that I have with BIP148 are of a purely technical nature. And I think one thing that seems to be missing from all of the coverage and the dialogue about BIP148 is, well, where is Bitcoin Core on this? So for example, why is it the case that when people advocate running BIP148, they send you to uasf.co to download software that's not published by Core? So I honestly don't really know the answer to that, but I do know that not all of Core is behind it, and for that reason, there is no BIP148 being produced by Core. So that's something that people, that's a very important point, because the entire way that Bitcoin works is you've got multiple consensus processes going around, not just the minor consensus that's being done, but you also have the whole developer side of well, what do we do when we change the actual protocol of Bitcoin? How do we improve Bitcoin? And it's a very important process that needs to take place on the Bitcoin developer mailing lists. So there's this concept called rough consensus, and it has a very concrete definition, and it's used on the Bitcoin core mailing lists. The basic idea is, we have proposals that people make, and we discuss them and talk about them. And if anyone has any objection to it, they can make their objection. And if that objection is addressed sort of by the wider community on purely technical grounds, then it's considered a sort of done matter. And then you can raise other objections. And until there are basically no objections remaining that are of a legitimate nature, you can't just repeat the same objection over and over. If it's clearly been technically addressed, then it's considered a done matter. And there are no objections remaining, you've reached rough consensus, and now you can proceed and go according to whatever that plan was. As long as no other new objections are raised, release a new software update for everyone, et cetera. That's a very important process that needs to be respected because, for example, with BIP148, this is I really like the idea, and I totally get the spirit of like, hey, the miners are screwing us over. Well, let's just the users have the real power, the users have the real control. Let's take that power and let's sort of go forward and activate SegWit. It's a very endearing, it's very, not just endearing, but it's all of the frustration that's being created by the miners not activating SegWit and holding the blockchain the Bitcoin blockchain hostage in a sense from improving itself. All of that frustration can kind of be taken out in the form of this user-assisted soft fork. But the point of rough consensus is to make sure that when you make a change to Bitcoin, you don't do something dumb. You have to give plenty of time when dealing with the $30 billion blockchain for lots of different eyeballs to have a look at the problem and make sure that you don't end up doing something stupid that ends up ruining the entire network or severely harming the value of it. Something unexpected might be found in that's like a first order, a second order, or third order consequence of some of the changes being proposed. And BIP148 has actually a very obvious flaw. It's very obvious, actually, thanks in large part to Ethereum. So I would say that right now, the Bitcoiners out there really should be thanking Ethereum for going out there and experimenting and making mistakes, because those are mistakes that Ethereum made and Ethereum has learned from, and mistakes that Bitcoin now doesn't have to make. And I'm specifically referring to the replay attack. That's the biggest problem with BIP148, in my view, is the replay attack. I've been talking for a little while now, so I'm going to take a little break and give, John, if you have anything to say, let me know, or I can continue.
Thanks, Greg. I'm just taking notes here. It sounds like you've gotten to the heart of the issue, so I will let you proceed. I don't have any commentary at the moment.
Okay. Okay, so the replay attack is a concern that's not just mine. It's a concern of a whole bunch of people. So we have the exchanges who are concerned about this. We have the core developers who are concerned about this. And we have spectators and commentators who are also concerned about this. Jimmy Song, I think today, just published a very long blog post which talks titled UASF BIP148 Scenarios in Game Theory. And I'm so glad that he finally published a post that acknowledges the replay attack. I think it kind of still doesn't really go into it significantly enough. It's the #1 problem with BIP148. So what is the replay attack? To a lot of Bitcoiners, this term might be new. And the reason is because Bitcoin hasn't had to deal with it, but Ethereum had to deal with it. And it really, really wreaked, I think is the term, yeah, wreaked havoc on the entire Ethereum ecosystem as well as the exchanges. The basic idea is that, and we're now rolling back the clock, going back in time to the DAO situation, and the that's when somebody made a smart contract that had a flaw in it that was discovered too late, and then $150 million started getting stolen, and people were starting freaking out, and then the Ethereum leaders were forced to basically compromise their whole code is law shtick, and that resulted in Ethereum, the hard forking from the legacy chain, and the legacy chain was renamed to Ethereum Classic. So that was a very different situation than what we're talking about with the user-assisted soft fork. One of the biggest differences between those two situations is, one is a soft fork and the other is a hard fork. And what's the difference? Well, the difference is that a hard fork is a complete deviation. It's a completely new protocol, and what happens on a hard fork is follows a completely different set of rules than, or let's just say incompatible rules than when you do a soft fork. When you have a soft fork, you have a whole bunch of legacy clients that, should they not upgrade, are going to be okay. They'll still be able to participate in some of the consensus. Basically, the consensus rules become more narrow. The clients that upgrade to the soft fork will start rejecting transactions and even blocks that do not fit the more narrow set of rules. But because these are narrower set of rules, and they still have all the old previous rules, the legacy clients, who are more liberal in a sense, will still be able to participate in the network. In a hard fork, that's not what happens. In a hard fork, you have blocks being generated that are valid on one chain and completely invalid to the previous set of nodes. So that's one very important, significant difference. And these lead to two different kinds of, one second. Okay. So these lead to two different kinds of scenarios completely, and two different kinds of attacks. One is called the wipeout attack, and the other is called a replay attack. We're going to stick with replay. So even in a hard fork situation, you can have the replay attack, and this is what happened. The Ethereum community was very rushed. They had a deadline approaching, basically, when the attacker could withdraw the Ethereum that he had stolen effectively. Some argue it wasn't theft, that he was following the code as law thing. That's up for a philosophical debate. Anywho, after a certain amount of time, the attacker would be able to take his Ether and convert it to whatever he wants, Bitcoin, etc. So they were under a lot of time pressure, and so they made some mistakes. One of the mistakes that they made was they released a hard fork that did not have replay protection. And what this means is that, sorry, one second, I'm getting notifications and I'm quitting the app that's banging in my ear. So one of the mistakes that, was the replay attack. And so what happened was that people assumed that they would be able to have two different coins on two different blockchains, and that they would be able to sell one coin and buy the other, and do different sets of transactions on the two chains. Somebody pointed out this thing called the replay attack after they, as they were getting ready to release the software, and by that point in time, it was too late to fix it. They just had to release it, so they released it. And they posted as well a blog post on how to mitigate against the replay attack. But in all of the confusion, many exchanges did not follow that advice. And Coinbase in particular got really screwed by this. There was the situation where people were able to get free Ether Classic in a sense, because Coinbase was selling Ether and they were not splitting that Ether from Ether Classic in a sense. And they were selling the Ether for the price of Ether, not for the price of Ether plus Ether Classic. So what does it mean to split a token? What it means is, and what is the replay attack? So a replay attack is when you have two separate chains going on, and somebody on the network, it doesn't matter who, anyone can do this. This is important as well to understand that. There's no permission required to do a replay attack. There's nothing difficult about it. You just listen to transactions being broadcast for one chain, and you broadcast them to the other chain. You just rebroadcast them, and that's called a replay attack. And the DAO attacker was doing this throughout the entire thing. All of the transactions that were meant for the Ethereum Classic chain were getting rebroadcast on the Ethereum chain. So in a sense, there were not two different chains. They were mostly doing the same thing, two chains being mirrored. In order to split coins, you have to do something to those coins that makes them valid on one blockchain but invalid on another blockchain. And there are different techniques and different methods that you can use to do this. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, in that they're not very easy to do, or they're very complicated, or they're unlikely, they only work sometimes, etc. In the case of Ethereum, because Ethereum had smart contracts, they were able to come up, the community came up with splitting contracts. These are contracts that you send your Ether to, and on one chain you can get that Ether back, and on another chain you can't. So that's how they were able to split Ether in Ethereum Classic. And then the exchanges started picking this up and doing this for people as well, and people could do it by themselves. So fast forwarding the clock now to today, and the BIP148 situation, the user-assisted soft fork. People are being told that they have this power to, I think like one of the terms thrown around is like this asymmetric game theory situation where the miners are kind of, worried about the wipeout attack, which is basically, because we're dealing with a soft fork now and not a hard fork, which means that the people who are running the user-assisted soft fork nodes, the BIP148 nodes, they are going to refuse to rebroadcast blocks that don't fit the new set of more restrictive rules, and they're going to start creating their own chain. So this effectively can create a new chain, and the wipeout attack is when, for a moment, let's say you've got this smaller chain, the BIP148 chain has some miners making blocks for. Remember, this is another point that people keep forgetting, is that you can't. It's not entirely user-assisted. You can't do a 100% user-assisted soft fork, because you need blocks, and users and nodes don't make blocks. Miners make blocks. So you need some of the miners on your side to make these blocks.
Real quick, I want to clarify that the acronym UASF stands for user activated soft fork. So the idea is that rather than relying on miner signaling and the percent of the last 1,000 blocks or something like that to activate the soft fork, instead users' clients will just after a specific block start enforcing the new rules. And so that's why they call it a user activated soft fork, because it's the user's client that's like activating the soft fork, and not miners by mining a particular number of blocks with a certain signal or something like that. So
I would not say that it's 100% correct, because it's user activated in the sense that they're saying that their full nodes are going to reject any blocks that are not signaling SegWit. That's all it means. So they need somebody to be generating those blocks that are signaling SegWit, and they aren't making those blocks. The miners are making those blocks. So they need some fraction of those miners on their side. If they don't have those miners, they're just going to be sitting there without any blocks, and that chain isn't going to be doing anything, and it's going to be completely worthless. So and not only is it going to be completely worthless, but it's going to get more and more worthless as time goes on, because people are still sending transactions to the network, and those transactions have to get into blocks, and they're getting into the legacy blocks. But the longer they're not getting into your 148 chain, the bigger backlog you have, the higher the transaction fees there are, the more of a mess it is. So etc. So anywho, the wipeout situation is basically the following. The wipeout attack is when, and this is the one that people were focusing on sort of up until myself and I guess some others started like yelling replay attack. The wipeout situation is fairly, attack is easy to understand. Basically, the legacy chain is going to continue on. And let's say you get some miners onto the 148 chain and they start making blocks. The second you get 50%, over 50% of miners on your side, then what happens is, and there are different ways of doing this. There's different timings and whatnot that can be done. Jimmy Song goes into detail on the various different ones in his post, which I retweeted, so you can read about that in detail. Anywho, so anytime the legacy, or sorry, the 148 chain gets longer, the legacy nodes and the legacy clients have to accept this new chain. They have no choice in the matter, because this new chain is valid according to their rules, and the longest chain wins according to Bitcoin's general rules. So, you know, if this chain had like this amount of blocks mined, and the other chain got that amount plus some more, and all of a sudden this chain appeared on the network, you know, from starting at this point, then everything that happened here would just be tossed out the window. All of those transactions would be invalid, and you would now have a version of events. Now, the replay attack has to be taken into consideration as well, because if that was to happen, remember, everything that's happening on both chains is theoretically being mirrored. So that might not, the wipeout attack might actually not be that bad, because if there's a replay attack going on, then everything that happened here before this got wiped out should have been replayed on the other chain, and so it got wiped out. But let's focus now on the replay attack, because that is the real problem with BIP148. The replay attack effectively means, and it means you don't have a coin. The chain isn't really separate. They're not really. You can't really think of them as two different chains. That's what the replay attack does. Is it says they're separate, but not really. They're basically the same thing. They have the same transactions in them. They appear like the same thing. So you can't. You know, it really, really frustrates me when I read BIP148 blog posts and Reddit comments and all this other stuff talking about 148 coins as though they're going to exist. They're not going to exist, because for them to exist, you have to have the situation where you have less than 51% of the miners on your side. And so you have this small chain going on, and all of the transactions are being replayed. So for the duration that this chain is smaller, you have theoretically a separate chain with the same things going on it. If you wanted to sell your legacy coins and buy these other coins that are here, well, what happens when you sell your legacy coins? So you go to sell your legacy coins. That transaction, the fact that you sold those legacy coins, gets transmitted, and that action gets reproduced on the 148 chain. So in selling your legacy coins, you just also sold, without realizing it, your 148 coins. So now you don't have any legacy coins, and you don't have any 148 coins, and you're kind of screwed. And the same goes in the other direction. If you were to sell your 148 coins, well, you know, thinking that they're going to be worthless, guess what? You just sold all of your legacy coins as well. That match those for the ones that you sold on the 148 chain. So you can't, in other words, you can't sell one of these coins without selling the other. And so you don't really have two separate coins. In order to resolve this situation, you need something to prevent the replay attack. And this brings us to the final sort of nail in the coffin of BIP148, which is that, at least so far, all of the methods that I have seen for splitting coins for Bitcoin transactions are not tenable. I'll name two of them and point out why they're not tenable. One of them is, you know, one of the first ones that was mentioned to me by Luke Dash Jr. was double spending to yourself. And he you know, if you go through my Twitter feed, you can find a link to where he posts on Reddit this like long series of steps about how you're supposed to use n-locked time transactions, and you're supposed to send them to both chains, and you know, it's a really complicated process to double spend these things, and then there's also a chance that it might not work, so you have to do it again, and it's not something that users can do themselves because it's really complicated, and you have to generate the transactions yourself, and you also can't really have like a client-side button that does this for you, because that would kind of defeat the purpose of Bitcoin. It would make, first of all, zero-conf completely unreliable for wallets to have this, you know, guaranteed easy to double spend your transactions. The whole point of Bitcoin is to prevent double spending in a decentralized way. So to make it trivial to do this is in of itself a problem. It's also not 100% reliable, so it could fail. Because of that, if people were starting to actually try to do this, you would have additional, again, like I said, secondary, tertiary problems that can arise from these kinds of decisions, which all have to be sort of played out in developers' minds before adopting some kind of like, radical fork like this or plan. So imagine, people trying to do this and then clogging the network with all of these double spending transactions. That could cause fees to rise beyond how high they are already. That might have additional consequences that we haven't even played out yet, unknown consequences. Exchanges are very unlikely to do that for you. Wallets are very unlikely to do that for you. It would cause a lot of problems to try to split your coins in that method. Another method was recommended, or not recommended, but suggested. The idea of, well, any coins that are created after the split, after BIP148 activates, those coins are going to be unique. So any coins created, they're called coin-based transactions. Any coin-based transactions created after the split by miners on the 148 chain can be used to mix those coins in transactions with other coins and transactions, and then those transactions, like you can take a little bit of a 1 penny of a miner coin and mix it with your coins, and because the miner coins don't exist on the legacy chain, that mixing in that transaction is a way of splitting, creating a unique transaction to this 148 chain, and that's a different splitting method. Now that has problems, very obvious problems of its own as well. It completely destroys fungibility. Fungibility is a very important property that all Bitcoiners want. And it's, what it does is it says basically there are special coins out there that you really want if you don't want to lose all your other coins. And then people are going to try to like go for these special unique coins. And destroying fungibility is a no-go, like off the bat. And maybe somebody will find out some other method of splitting coins that actually is tenable, and in that case, BIP148 might become maybe reasonable, but I first of all doubt it. And another point is that I'll just read from Jimmy Song's post where he makes a good point, and he says that in order for so he says that exchanges are going to demand both wipeout protection and replay protection. And yes, he's right about that. Any smart, intelligent, at all informed exchange that's paying attention to this situation is going to want both wipeout protection and replay protection. And he says, here's the problem. In order to offer such protection, the fork between the coins has to become permanent. At least as Bitcoin is currently constituted, there is no way to offer wipeout or replay protection without also eliminating the possibility of emerging with a single chain. He then goes on to say, yet as we've seen, people will demand the listing of coins from both forks. Thus, it's likely that miners will hard fork. I don't think it's likely that miners will hard fork. I think, honestly, I don't know what the miners are going to do. A big factor in this whole situation is ignorance. People point to Litecoin and, oh, Litecoin, maybe was able to get SegWit because the miners were afraid of the user-assisted soft fork. But in my opinion, as far like if that has a lick of truth to it, then it's very likely that they were afraid of something they shouldn't have been afraid because they were just ignorant of how Bitcoin works, what can happen, all these replay attack things. But now, as the Bitcoin network is considering this, I really doubt that that ignorance is going to remain. I think that the miners will become informed, and they'll realize that they don't really have to do anything. They're not really threatened by BIP148. It's not a threat at all to them because of replay attacks. So I think I'll stop right there, and we're now at 6:30, so that's a good stopping point.
Okay, cool. So I have two questions that might, if you could help clarify some points. The first question is, Just to clarify, like under what scenario these issues that you talk about would be could be happening on the network, because this is a failure mode that happens under a specific set of conditions. So if you could just describe those conditions, that might clarify things for the audience. And the second is less a question, more a comment on the last part that you were talking about, which is that miners aren't threatened at all by 148 because of the lack of replay protection. You also alluded to earlier that user-activated softworks actually need miners to work, and I would just put forward the idea that user-activated softworks have traction right now at all because of if the economic majority gets on board with the user-activated soft fork, particularly economic nodes that miners might be trying to offload their mined coins to. I think the idea here is that because economic nodes that enforce 148 will be rejecting any blocks mined by miners that are not compliant with BIP148. And so the miners will feel financial pressure to upgrade their nodes to signal for SegWit, so that their blocks will be accepted by the economic nodes. And
let's go in the other direction. Let's address that question right now.
Sure, you can do that.
Yeah. So the idea that the miners will feel pressure because the economic nodes will be rejecting their blocks. No. The reason why that's not the case is because if there are two scenarios that we're talking about, and one is that the miners have 51% or more are running the legacy chain versus not. So if more than if the 148 chain does not have more than 51% of the hash power of the miners behind them. So it doesn't matter, what I'm saying is it doesn't matter how much of the economic nodes are on their side. If they have less than 50%, then what that means is that it doesn't matter if they reject those blocks, because like that would be, it wouldn't, like literally it wouldn't make any sense. They would be rejecting all, not all of the blocks, right? Because the idea is that they would have some miners on their side, and they would be making this small chain off to the side. And again, this is the idea of you having two coins, but as I mentioned before, you don't have two coins, you have only one coin. So that's the situation, and that kind of goes back to the first question you asked, is under what scenarios these kinds of attacks come into play. So if you have less than 51% of the miners on your side, then you're going to have two chains, but you're going to have one coin. You're just going to have a copy of the legacy chain. That's all you're going to have effectively because of the replay attacks. So, and then there are other things that come into play, but that's the main one. That's really the you can go to Jimmy Song. He talks about different scenarios, but the main scenario that I'm focusing on, that I think is the most important point, is that the replay attacks mean that you are going to basically have a mirror copy of the legacy chain being created. And you're not going to have a separate coin. And so where's the incentive at all? Where's the threat to the majority of the miners? If the smaller, even if they have more of the economy behind them, it doesn't really matter that they're not accepting the other blocks. Those same transactions are happening on the other one, and that situation is not really, it's not tenable. You can't use Bitcoin at that point. You can't use those 148 coins. They're not really usable. Only the legacy chain is primarily usable, is my understanding. I'm starting to confuse myself with this, to be honest, but that's the basic point. but you know, if you want, we can sit here and think about it. I can you know, give me a minute and like play it out in my head. Is basically yeah. So
how about this, Greg? I'll
yeah.
let you think about it for a minute, and
Okay.
I'll check Twitter to see if we have any
Let's see if there's
questions
any
from the
questions.
audience. And if you think of something, feel free to just
I mean, okay. So
jump right in.
here's one thing. Like, what are they going to be doing? What is this smaller chain going to be doing of the economic nodes? Like, what is the actual threat to the miners? The threat is that they're going to be you know, not giving them the Coinbase transactions, I guess, right? They're going to be tossing out those Coinbase transactions.
Well, the whole blocks. I mean, there's, you know, the economic nodes are basically going to just reject any attempts by the miners to offload their coins, because according to the economic nodes that are enforcing 148, those miners never got the coins. They don't see that version of history. So, you know, the miners are basically going to be sending funny money back and forth to themselves until they get on the same side of history as the nodes that actually have the economic power that are actually buying coins with real money.
Yeah, but
like the way that I described it today is an extreme scenario, but it's extreme to make a point. Like, imagine if literally every single user of Bitcoin that wasn't a miner decided to enforce a BIP148, but exactly, I don't know, enough miners to just mine a block, like one block,
well, so
in the
supposing you're right.
difficulty.
Supposing you're right, and
Difficulty. Hold
that is the
on.
case.
Just let me finish the scenario for the sake of the audience.
Okay. Yeah.
So like, basically, so there's a very huge, like, super majority of miners that are not enforcing a BIP 148 or signaling for SegWit, and you've got literally every single other user of Bitcoin that's enforcing 148. What do you think the miners are going to do in that scenario?
So are you saying that it's like opposite? You have all of the miners on the legacy chain and all of the users on 148?
Yeah, either all of the miners or, you know, a vast majority of them, because we already have.
I mean, Bitcoin just like the whole system just stops functioning at that point because you're not getting blocks. The system has to produce blocks to perform its function. You can't, like, if someone tries to send a payment, well, that payment is just going to get stuck in the mempool basically, and that's it. And then Bitcoin ceases to function as a useful service at that point, and it's basically game over for everyone. So that's not going to happen. But going back to your point about well, the miners on the majority hash rate aren't getting their Coinbase transactions. Sure, that's valid. I'll give you that.
That's like what, $30,000 every 10 minutes that they're missing out on.
Yeah, but that again, that's only if you have like literally every exchange on your side rejecting those blocks. Meanwhile,
right, and how many have come out in support of SegWit?
Meanwhile, the chain that you actually have to play with, it has become a worse chain. It's confirmation times have gone through the roof. It's no longer 10 minutes for a confirmation. It's now maybe an hour for one confirmation. The value of, if during this time people try to trade, right, on the exchanges, and you've got, in this hypothetical scenario, all of the exchanges on your side, well, you're not going to be able to trade, okay? You're not going to be able to trade for multiple reasons. One is you haven't split your coins, right? So you can't trade until you split your coins.
Well, I mean, to be fair, I mean, most exchanges, real quick, like most exchanges are just, they're flipping around numbers in their databases. Like, the replay stuff doesn't come into question until people try to deposit or withdraw. But
no, they can't flip their numbers in their databases because then they're going to get sued. you know, because the numbers in their databases have to match what ends up happening on the actual blockchain.
No, it's not like, no, exchanges aren't doing you know, like trades between traders on the blockchain.
Yeah, if people pull out the coins, you know, if I trade Bitcoin for, you know, Ether, for example, and then I want to, and then both of those users want to take their Bitcoin out or in their Ether out from the exchange, then the numbers in the database of the exchange have to settle out and make that possible. But if the exchange isn't able to send a transaction to the actual Bitcoin network to like say, okay, this has now been made real, well, the exchanges won't also, like, they will not be able to interact with Bitcoin. Like, again, you don't have replay protection, so that already eliminates this possibility. But like, even if you did, you have a smaller chain where the confirmation time has like gone through the roof, and you have this like huge, ever-increasing backlog of people trying to sell their 148 coins and sell their legacy coins, and it would be a nightmare, and it's not going to work. So they're not going to go for it. So again, the less than 50% scenario, even if you have miraculously a set of really dumb exchanges on your side, and they're all dumb, it would be a catastrophe, a complete, you know, cluster F, you know. So I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it can happen. And because, that's the entire point, because you need more than 50% of the hash rate on your side, and not just more, not like 51% or 52%, you need like a significant margin of safety, because if there's somebody watching this whole situation and trying to take advantage of it to just like screw with the Bitcoin network and attack Bitcoin itself, they can suddenly bring a whole bunch of miners online and running 148 nodes, and then bring that number back down from you know, 60 to like 49, and then cause panic. You need like a significant margin of error here, above 50% on your side. And that's the whole sort of idea here, is that if Bitcoin is to change, there needs to be a safe way of doing it, like a rational, safe way of doing it that is technically feasible, that doesn't result in the whole system exploding. And that is not BIP148. I don't think that's BIP149 either. From what I looked at, it still has the same kind of flag day nonsense. It needs to be based on hash power at the end of the day. It just has to be based on hash power. So if you're not going to do 95% like SegWit wants, try going for 80%. You know, maybe it'll be more easier to persuade the miners. But doing this kind of user-assisted soft fork thing, I don't think it's tenable.
So to be clear, you don't think that Bitcoin can ever progress as a system through the will of the users alone, that they need at least a majority of miners to essentially support or sign off on any soft fork or hard fork future changes?
No, I do not believe that. I do believe that users can modify the nature of Bitcoin. It's just that the way that they have to go about it has to be different. You know, you're not going to like me for saying this, but there is a way that users can make their voice heard in a different way. And let me be clear here. Disclaimer, because of the situation, I bought some Litecoin, so there's my, you know, potential financial bias. But the idea is that if you want SegWit, well, SegWit's out there. It's on some different blockchains. Litecoin is one of them. And if miners are more rewarded for using SegWit by mining Litecoin, then they're going to start mining on blockchains that support SegWit, and there will be fewer miners mining blockchains that don't support SegWit. And then eventually, sure, you know, maybe the price of Bitcoin might, I don't even think the price of Bitcoin will fall necessarily if users start buying Litecoin. I think that what will happen is that the price of Litecoin will increase, and the price of Bitcoin might stay, like its percentage of the whole cryptocurrency space would decrease, obviously, as other currencies that are out there gain in the percentage of the total cryptocurrency market cap, that might decrease. I think that that's a reasonable way, basically, is that you take away the funding that the miners have in that way. And then they'll be more amicable to supporting SegWit on Bitcoin as well. So that's, users might not like that idea. Bitcoin hardcore Bitcoin maximalists might not like that idea. That's fine. To be honest, there's something really desirable about a blockchain that doesn't change. That isn't susceptible to politics. Nobody ever got mad at gold for being gold. It's just doing its thing, being gold, and look at its price and market cap, doing great.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a poor comparison since gold can be divided down to the atomic level and is accessible by virtually anybody who wants it, whereas Bitcoin has, right now scarce block size, and it's like everybody in the world cannot own Bitcoin simply because there's not enough block space to fit that many transactions today. So it's not exact perfect analogy, but in any case, so to be clear, what you're saying is that you think that a user a change to Bitcoin that's supported by a majority of users can get through without support from a majority of miners under what conditions exactly?
Well, I'm saying that the users can change the minds of the miners. Users have the power to, just like in any kind of a market space where
Okay. I get what you said. I get what you mean now with the
The customers.
So, I mean, don't you think BIP148 sends much clearer market signals than something really correlated with anything like with altcoin price going up or something like that? I mean,
I don't think that BIP148 is tenable. I don't think it is technically feasible. I don't think it's technically. I don't think it's a threat because of how many problems it has. So I don't think the miners are threatened by it. But the miners who are mining the Bitcoin blockchain are threatened by competition from other miners. So if they see, for example, if Jihan, for example, sees that, I could make like twice as much mining Litecoin or twice as much mining this other blockchain that supports SegWit than I can mining Bitcoin, he's going to turn his miners and point them in the direction of that other currency. He's going to be
real quick, hold on. His miners are SHA-256 ASICs. He can only use them to mine a double SHA-256 proof of work blockchain.
At the moment,
so
he can make an investment and maybe sell off his miners. I don't know, but either way, he's not going to be making as much as the other miners who are mining on that on that other chain. And eventually, if the price, the price competition here between the blockchains might kick into gear where it becomes no longer profitable for him to mine Bitcoin. I mean, there's definitely a point
Greg,
at which the investment he gets from a higher return on another currency kind of incentivizes him to go to that and start mining on that other chain. And maybe, who knows, maybe he'll find out like some secret patented ASIC boost for Litecoin or something like that and be like, I'm going to go do that. Whatever, and that might not be the only way. Maybe there'll be another idea. I'm not saying that's the only one. There might be another good idea out there. All I'm saying, my whole point is BIP148, bad idea. That's it.
Okay. Well, if you actually wrote these down, feel free to share a link to, if you publish them somewhere, maybe in a GitHub gist or wherever else makes sense for you to publish, and I'll link them to the video here so people can have notes from this. I'll share my notes as well. And thank you for coming on this YouTube live broadcast to discuss this, Greg. I'll be interested to hear feedback from people who watch the video, and if other people have concerns about BIP148 that they want to share like this, feel free to just ping me on Twitter or something, and we can do that. Maybe we can have more of these videos. For me, I support BIP148, like I said in the beginning, because what's
I haven't convinced you.
What's clear about everybody, from not everybody, from a majority of economic participants in Bitcoin today, or the companies that kind of like represent them, is that the economic majority wants SegWit, and over 80% of the hash power just also signed an agreement to activate SegWit. And so I don't see a flag day on August 1st for activating SegWit to be incompatible with those agreements. And I think that everybody who has supported SegWit in the past should coordinate together to activate SegWit without incident on or before August 1st. So that's what I want to see come out of this, and I hope that these concerns about chain splits and replays and wipeouts and all of this never even become anywhere close to a near probability potential. So that's where I stand. To answer your comment there, Greg, you haven't really convinced me. I think that BIP148 is safe precisely because there is so much support for SegWit on both sides of the aisle, as it were. And I think that SegWit is going to activate without issue before August 1st. Thanks again, Greg, for taking the time to join me tonight. And thank you, everybody who's watching, for joining us. Look forward to the further discussion about this online.
Thank you, John, for hosting this and having me on to talk about this.
Absolutely. Good night, everyone.